Today we are talking drones, physical security, and more specifically beyond visual line of sight, and why that is such an important factor in the total package. So currently, drones and operating drones are governed by the FAA and specifically Part 107, which mandates that a pilot who is operating a drone must maintain visual line of sight with that drone. That presents a challenge for us when using it in a security function because we want to augment or replace the security officer on the ground. And if we need somebody there to operate the drone, then we defeat that purpose. So I've been working on how to use drones in physical security for about 10 years now, and the beyond visual line of sight is the most needed piece and the one that is finally coming together to make this a reality, to where we can now fly beyond visual line of sight and have a remote drone pilot in our operations center operating the drone autonomously while it's out on a patrol or responding to an event on a property. So very key for us to make that entire ecosystem work by removing the pilot from the ground and pulling them into our operations center where we can do this now remotely. So when we're talking about flying drones beyond visual line of sight, it is a different type of piloting and different than you might think as far as your typical drone that you buy from Best Buy or that you may be familiar with, where you're flying it from a remote control and watching where it's going. Now we have the pilot in our remote operating center flying the drone through the computer screen. So we're doing it through the view of the camera in the drone, but we're also flying pre-programmed routes. So the pilot function is more looking for anomalies, looking for suspicious activity, available if something goes wrong, or maybe they're flying a patrol, they see something suspicious, they can then take over and manually fly the aircraft to an area of interest, follow somebody, look a little bit closer. You can get a waiver to that, to where you can get a waiver to fly beyond visual line of sight, but that has been a very cumbersome process. You have to file a lot of paperwork, it's very time consuming, it costs a lot of money. Recently, we have received a nationwide beyond visual line of sight waiver that allows us to fly beyond visual line of sight without having to get a site-by-site waiver, which has been a game changer for us because now we can scale that nationwide without having the cumbersome process of going site-by-site. So when we're talking about using drones in physical security, we basically have two purposes or two missions, and we call it autonomous response and patrol, or ARP. The drone can do two things. It can patrol preventatively, looking for suspicious activity or areas of concern, or it can respond to some kind of triggering event. That could be a camera, that could be a radar perimeter, a photo beam, but the point being, at that point, the drone is responding to an event or an area to investigate further. And that's how we use it. And very similar to what an on-site security officer might do, they're patrolling the property or responding to incidents like that. This allows us to do that same thing, but at a fraction of the cost. And some people will say, well, aren't you cannibalizing your physical security business by replacing the security officers? And my answer is no. I really think the key is blending the two together. And this allows us to have a much better quality security officer. If we're reducing the cost to the customer, we're allowing the technology to do 90% of the work. We want it to do the detection work, but there's still a last mile that the physical security officer needs to handle, and that is, okay, we've seen something suspicious, what action do we take? And I think there's some misconceptions, but also some responsibility that comes along with it. The drone is not watching people for nefarious reasons. It's not equipped with guns and pepper spray and taking people out type of thing. And the privacy concern is a real one. It's something that we focus heavily on training. It's something that the insurance carriers have an eye towards. We've got these drones in the air and they've got some really good capabilities from a camera, zooming in and doing different things. We want to make sure that we are keeping our eyes on the property that we're paid to protect and not wandering to the neighbor's property or zooming into the apartment complex across the street. So we have strict protocols on how we're storing images, what we're seeing. We have some providers that have really slick mechanisms of, we draw a geofence around the property that we are to protect, And as the drone is flying around, anything outside of that geofence is blurred. So we can't even see what's happening outside of that. And so there's some really robust measures that are coming into play. There's sometimes a perception that it must be a large area for the drone to be a viable option. And we're seeing it work very well for perimeter detection, for car lots, for construction sites, for anybody that's using or protecting outdoor assets, property management. Construction is one that's got an interesting use case, and we're seeing this in several where maybe we're using the drone for a security reason, but then also has operational value. We might be using it to inspect roofs or inspect equipment or fly a mission once a week to identify on a construction site what areas may need addressed. The siding is off on this, it needs repaired, or some people are using them to get data from, how much dirt is needed to grade this particular landscape to this angle, and we're using it to project manage how is the project progressing, and did the lumber get delivered on the right day, and all of these things, to where maybe during the day we're using it operationally and at night we're using it for a security means, but that gives us the access or the ability to pull from the operational budget or pull from the security budget, and it's not just a one-size-fits-all. It can serve many missions for an organization. We're flying these things remotely. We need a very robust facility to be able to operate these safely. Our video monitoring center, we monitor a couple thousand cameras across the country, as well as piloting drones remotely. We focus heavily on training operators. We also focus on having redundant internet and power systems. So if we've got a drone in the air, we lose power at the facility, we have a power generator that will kick in and make sure that there's continuity. And the UL certification is very powerful because we're audited by an independent body that comes in and sets standards and then also checks us against that to make sure that we're fulfilling and staying up. Do we check the generator once a week? Do we have the policies, the training procedures in place? The monitoring center is also 5 Diamond certified, which is kind of the gold standard of remote video monitoring. So when we're talking about remote piloting and flying beyond visual line of sight, we may be removing the pilot from the physical location where the drone is flying, but it's still important that we have a licensed and certified pilot in our monitoring center that knows the airspace rules, the weather requirements, the emergency procedures, everything involved with piloting a drone still stands, and something that our monitoring center is staffed, and those operating the drones are fully trained and fully licensed through the FAA as remote drone pilots, and also an important part of the program. So when we're talking about a drone program, obviously there's several pieces that we discussed today, and I think those interested in using this technology have the decision to make of, do we have this program in-house and do it ourselves, or do we outsource this to a provider like Titan Protection, who manages the record keeping, the pilot training, the maintenance, all of the pieces that are involved in this. And that's what we offer to our customers, is drone as a service. They're able to access the data, get the camera feeds, get the functionality of the drone without the cost, headache, and liability of doing it themselves. Well, that's a high-level overview of beyond visual line of sight and why it's important for physical security in drones. If you have any questions at all, reach out, email, social media. Happy to help in any manner that we can. Thanks for joining us.